So, in this video, I want to talk about the things that people who are critical of me say, some of which are accurate, just so that I'm being fair to all the things I comment about. This is not going to be super well formulated again, but what else is new, right? So, first of all, I think the most common thing I get is that my standards are too high. Maybe I'm a perfectionist. Maybe my standards are too high for everything. Maybe it's because I feel like by accepting lower standards, that makes me a failure, because it means that I will never achieve the higher standard that I would like to achieve. And, chances are that I won't. I'm an idealist, and, I'm looking for perfection in everything. I'm looking for perfection in my musicianship. I'm looking for perfection in women. I'm looking for perfection in the world and society. And, maybe some would say I'm not willing to work for it, and, in large part, I guess that's true. I've already mentioned how I'm not the most productive person in the world, so no big surprise there. And, regardless of what I think about fairness in the world and how there's a lack of it, most people would probably just tell me, most of my critics would probably just say, look, you deal with what you're given and you make the best of it. Now, I hate that concept because, like I said, there's no fairness involved in that. But I guess that's reality, and you have to deal with it, is what most people would say. So, yes, I understand how most people deal with it, and maybe in accepting what I could get, taking what I could get, I could, originally get something and build from that and get something more and get something more. That's the idea. I think that you take what you can get at first and you see how far you can take that. So, that's the first thing, is that maybe I don't compromise when I should. Maybe I'm not willing to work for the things I really want. I have reasons for not being willing to work. I could list a lot of them. One is that I've been spoiled a long time by my parents, and I'm not used to having to, kick ass to get what I want. But, I don't know. I guess as an entitled person, most people would call me entitled. And as an entitled person, I want everything without having to work for it, because, I don't know, to me it seems like, I guess it would depend on the kind of work, If you're working for something that's a good cause, then, I believe in working towards it, but I have a hard time with people who'd say, oh, well, I have a hard time with people who are willing to work without thinking about the consequences of their work. But I've already mentioned that, there are ways, there are things I could do. If I wanted to become an engineer, then I could help work on alternative energy technologies. Or if I wanted to become, I could become a salesperson for alternative energy technologies, or go into marketing for them. There's probably going to be a lot of jobs in that sector, as long as society doesn't come crashing down. So yeah, I'm not putting in the full effort, sure. I'm not putting in the full effort. It's easier to complain than to do something about it, personally. But I don't think that means that I don't have a right to say the things I say. I think I'm pretty aware of most major trends happening, and, maybe I'm not doing everything I can to change it, but in a lot of ways I just feel like I don't have it in me to make those kinds of changes. And that's something else my critics would claim. Oh, well, you don't have any self-confidence, you don't think you can change things, you won't change things. Well, maybe there's some truth to that, but I don't know. I guess I'm such a perfectionist, such an idealist. The type of changes that I want to see are so massive that there's no way that I personally could really bring them about. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, yeah, sure, you can't change everything, but you got to do whatever you can to change things as much as you can. But I tend to have a hard time with that philosophy because, it seems like most of the great changes that happen only seem like great changes in retrospect, but there's still, it's like, yeah, sure, the civil rights movement, it was nice, I'm glad that there's been a somewhat steadily declining amount of racism. I mean, it's still there. I'm not trying to say that it's, gone. There's certainly plenty of racism, but, just the fact that we have a black president, that's a sign of progress, obviously. But at the same time, like I said, there's still racism, and there's still a lot of poor black people, and you have to wonder, well, how much of what's changed is just a token kind of, sort of a token change, or sort of something that's just, people paying lip service, and how much has actually changed. I mean, you still have massive inequality. It may not be. I mean, sometimes I feel like the equality gets shifted around. Instead of being, black people at this point. I mean, it is black people. There's still a lot of racism, but the overall rich-poor dichotomy is never really addressed. That's one where people haven't really made a lot of gains. But anyway, I'm getting into my standard thing. Basically, the point is, for this specific one, yes, I could be willing to work harder, so I'll grant you that. The cynics or the critics are right about that. And as far as a lack of confidence, well, yeah, I have a lack of confidence that I'll be able to change things in a big way. It's not that I have a lack of confidence that I'd be able to change things in a small way. I'm sure I could if I really applied myself, but I'm not going to be satisfied with those changes, I guess. Is what I think. I'm not going to be satisfied. Some people might say I would, but it's hard to be confident about changing things in a small way, or it's hard to be excited about changing things in a small way. But I know that's sort of my responsibility, is to do things like that, and I guess I'm not living up to that responsibility, so I'll own up to that. Let's see, what else do my critics say? With women, I make I talk about how women aren't interested, and make a lot of bitter comments. Well, I will admit that I don't try very hard with women. And certainly you're going to have a 0% success rate if you're not trying, and trying a lot, It's not entirely because I think I'm going to fail every time. I'm sure, the law of averages states that, some amount of women are going to find you attractive. It kind of goes back to my first point. So, well, my standards are too high, so, first of all, obviously, if I lowered my standards, my success rate would be, pretty high. And some people say, oh, well, you gotta start with women who aren't aren't such great catches, and move your way up to those who, as you get better at the whole courtship ritual. But, I have a hard time with that, because I kind of see sleeping around with lower level women is not particularly respectable behavior. Oh, let me just knock off a few ugly, whatever. Most people would say ugly bitches, but I'm not going to say that. Let me just get with some, lesser girls to get practice. And that just seems like an incredibly, heartless way to think about it. So, and not only that, but, you're putting yourself at risk for disease. You're breaking some hearts in the process, or maybe you'll get your own heart broken. Even, you never know. And there's no guarantee that sleeping with a bunch of lesser level girls is going to make you any more of a catch to the upper level girls. It'll give you practice and it'll make you better at approaching women in general, but there's no guarantee that you'll ever, you can like, again, you can work your way up to a certain point. You might get up to, at a certain point you might be like, oh, well, now I've moved up from dating 5s to 6s to 7s or whatever. I'm not talking about purely superficially. I'm talking about, overall, the whole package. But I just have a hard time with that because, I don't really want a string of relationships. I just want one decent one. But most people seem to think, oh, well, that's impossible for the average person. So maybe it is, and I'll own up to that. I don't try hard enough. And by the way, it's not like I haven't had opportunities, okay? Because there have been maybe, not too many, but like probably six women that showed, more or less, were not lacking in subtlety, that they were, interested in hooking up. But I guess, a large part, a lot of times I turn them down because I don't have a great body, and for, and not for the average reasons. It's not like, there was a time when I did have, and when I was thin, but I still didn't have a great body even when I was thin, because I lost a lot of weight, and I have other issues that I'm not going to specifically talk about here, but things that made it seem like with my clothes on, I looked pretty good, but with my clothes off, I wouldn't have looked so good. And I sort of felt like if I got involved with the women who were interested, that it would be kind of like lying to them, and I didn't want to get into that situation where suddenly I was, disrobing with them, and have to watch their shocked face, when they say, oh, well, this is not exactly what I was expecting, and it's like, it didn't feel fair to me to put them in that kind of situation, where they have to feel pressured to go along with it just because, they'd already shown interest and they didn't want to hurt my feelings, It's like, that doesn't seem fair to the women who are interested. I sort of feel like, they're getting sort of a false image. But, other people say, well, they have their faults too, and, they should have their faults. There was at least one girl who was a 10 that was interested in me. At least a 10 on my scale. She maybe was a little short, but she was gorgeous. And yeah, I didn't pull the trigger on that one either. So I am to blame for some of my own misery. I'm sure if I had gotten with the 10 girl, that would have been short-lived and would have ended badly, and would have ended with me being depressed for at least a year or two. But, I know they say everyone goes through that. So, anyway, basically, getting back to it, I haven't tried hard enough with women, and I can't blame women when, I can't prove that they are the way I say they are, because I haven't really given them a particular chance. But that doesn't change the fact that, I have sisters, and I see how they act. I see how women think a lot of the time, at least. And, what I'm saying is not absolutes. Obviously, there are always women who go against what I say, but what I generally see and say are just general trends that I'm noticing. Some of them may not be as, they're definitely not as universal as people might think I'm making them out to be in the videos. I'm not trying to talk universally. I'm just talking about trends. So, I wouldn't be offended if you don't fit the mold of what I'm talking about. If you do fit the mold of what I'm talking about, then there you have it. But anyway, so yeah, that's the other part. Another part might be, another thing that I can own up to is that I am pessimistic, and I do look at the negative side of life more than the positive side of life. There's no doubt in this. Now, I think a lot of people probably, it's easy for people to say, oh, well, you're being pessimistic when they haven't lived in your shoes. They don't know what's what sort of created the viewpoints you have, or why you might be inclined to look towards that side, while one person might be inclined to look towards that side while another person might not. It could be a matter of brain chemistry. It could be a matter of your own personal experiences. There's a lot of reasons why people might be optimists and pessimists, but I guess it's hard for me to imagine myself becoming more of an optimist without taking some kind of drug. So I don't know if that's just because the average person would turn pessimistic if they'd had the string of disappointments in their life that I've had, or if it's because I'm wired to be pessimistic for some reason, and it's led me to actually live a less fulfilled life than I otherwise would have. But I can admit to not being as grateful as I should be most of the time. I take this life for granted and the good things in it, and it's one of my flaws, as I tend to see the things that are wrong before I celebrate the things that are right. And I wish it didn't have to be that way. I wish my brain didn't work that way. But I don't want to take an antidepressant every day, because I'm not sure I believe in antidepressants, and I do believe that most people should at least be looking at the things that need to be fixed or need to be worked on in the current situation, because we're in such dire straits, morally and financially and system-wise, in the direction things are headed right now. But that's not to say that you can't, do what Sting says, and when the world is running down, you make the best of what's still around. Well, I haven't made the best of what's still around, and so that's my fault, But I'd like to be able to make the best of what's still around while changing things for the better, and I haven't yet found a way to do that, other than playing a drum circle. Yep, that's right. I like the drum circles. That's I don't know if I may not be changing anything, but at least if you're part of the Occupy movement, then you're at least attempting to bring attention to sort of the social justice issues that aren't being addressed particularly, but who knows how effective that is. I just like the drum anyway. So that's another one. Maybe another thing is that, it's easy for me. Other critics might say, well, it's easy for me to see the collectivist side of it and to want more concessions to the poor because I'm poor. I've never been rich. I don't know what it's like to have a lot of my money taken away in taxes. And, or I don't know what it's like to have worked so hard to have everything. Yes, that's true. I'm going to side on the poor. I'm going to side on the side of the liberals. I'm going to side for the things that will help make my life better. And sure, maybe it's kind of like a handout. Maybe maybe we shouldn't have a system that that rewards laziness. But I guess my problem with that is just that I feel like even though I'm a driver, it doesn't require any special skills. I didn't have to work hard to become a driver. All I had to do was, be able to drive a car safely. But, not everybody can drive a car safely. There's a lot of people who shouldn't be driving cars. There's a lot of people who aren't going to be as friendly as I'm going to be. They're not going to be as able to keep an even temper. I mean, like a lot of retail jobs, you have to have a certain, personality to be successful in sort of a customer service environment. And no, it doesn't take any special skills. It just takes being a generally good person. But regardless of that, there is a job to get done, and even though it's entry level work, if we didn't do it, then things wouldn't function. You need people to do entry-level work. So if you need people to do entry-level work, are most people saying that, well, if you're going to do entry-level work, that means that because you were unwilling to get the skills, because you were unwilling to put the work in that other people were to, get higher level skills, that you should have to work 2-3 jobs, in order to pay the bills, and still have any money left for a half decent quality of life. I mean, if you ask me, 40 hours a week is already a lot. And when I look at the things, when I look at what people want me to do, or what the people who are telling me that I'm lazy, what do they do? Well, a lot of these people, they're working 60 hours a week, businessmen, they're working from home, they're, they work with their phones, and they're traveling around the country, sleeping in hotels away from their family. They're slaving away, and maybe for them it's worth it, because they're professionals, they have respect. But at the same time, are they much happier than I am? I don't know. Maybe they are. I mean, if they love their work, then sure. But how many people love their work, really? How many people really love their work? How many people are doing their job because they love their work and, enjoy being the best at it? And how many people are doing their job because the monetary gain and the material gain makes it worthwhile? Because I'll tell you, for me, if I'm working 60 hours a week, I don't care if I have the money to buy Ferraris, private jets, go traveling to exotic destinations. If I'm working 60 hours a week, it's probably not going to be worthwhile to me. And I think this is a hard thing for, high achievers to understand, especially for people who are very concerned with wealth and material goods. Not everybody wants to have the Porsche. Certainly you'd like to have the woman who wants to be with you because of the Porsche. But even then, I'm not sure I do want that woman, because she's probably somewhat shallow, somewhat materialistic, not much of a deep thinker. If all it takes is a Ferrari to be with these women, then, you have to wonder, do they love you, or do they love the fact that they can ride around with you in a Ferrari? Or do they love you, or do they love the fact that you can take them to Tahiti for a weekend? It's like, I don't know, it's hard for me to think about, finding a job. And, if I could find a job, sure, where I loved the work. Let's say if I was doing, like, film scoring or something, I enjoy writing music. Maybe I'd enjoy, writing music for movies or something like that. If the chances of me getting that job are slim to none, first of all. But maybe if I really, really wanted it, really believed in it, and worked hard every day, maybe I could do film scoring, But how many hours a week am I going to be working? And, is the pay I'm going to get going to be worth it to me, for that amount of time? And, can you enjoy anything that you have to do 60 hours a week? For me, I'm not so sure I can. So, yes, I don't work as hard as you do. I don't work as hard as a lot of people do. And so, maybe maybe that means that, I don't deserve the things that they have. But I do believe that I deserve, it would be nice, I think, if I could work 40 hours a week and pay my rent and pay my bills. And, I don't have rent now, but if I had rent, I'd like to be able to work 40 hours a week at an entry-level job and pay for most of my major costs of living, and still have some money to go out to eat, maybe, once a month. Is that so much to ask for? Maybe go on a trip for a week once a year. Is that so much to ask for at entry level? Just to be able to get by, semi-comfortably. I'm not asking to be able to afford to go to Australia or Europe. Just Maybe a trip to the East Coast, see my family, maybe, a snowboarding trip, once a year. I don't have the money to do that. I don't have the money to pay for all the bills it would take for me to live alone, working 40 hours a week. I just don't, with car repairs, with, um, the rising price of gasoline, with, um, insurance and all the usual things you have to pay for. And with prices rising, how does $8 an hour going to cut it? It doesn't. It's not really a living wage. The minimum wage has been stagnant. And I realize that people in other countries are getting paid a hell of a lot less. But I assume that the relative purchasing power is a lot, greater with less money elsewhere. Otherwise, why would these people be working, dollar a day jobs? I mean, even if purchasing power is greater, though, I'm sure that the prices or the wages these people are being paid, they're not living particularly well either. They're living like indentured servants, basically. And that's what I feel like, I feel like, just because I work an entry-level job doesn't mean I should have to feel like I'm an indentured servant, where, I'd have to work basically 2 jobs. I'd probably have to work, 50 hours a week, 2 different jobs, at least, minimum, at minimum wage, in order to, adequately take care of myself. And is that fair? That I have to work that much just to get by reasonably comfortably? I don't think so, personally. Maybe you do, but I think I should have the option to work an unskilled job, a job that doesn't require as much knowledge, and still live a somewhat decent life. But that's where I disagree with people who are wealthier. So anyway, getting back to the original thing, yes, I could work harder, and I would be more deserving if I did work harder, but, that's not really, it's never been my goal, and I hope people understand that, I'm not after what most materialistic, shallow people are after. I am after the women, but, only from a very superficial level. You might find, not to say that there aren't, materialistic women who are also very interesting and smart and all that kind of thing, but, I don't know, it would be nice to find one that wasn't into that kind of stuff at all, and like I said, I don't know. Then again, I don't really try, so how would I know, right? Let's see, what else do critics say about me that's true? Well, a lot of times they say life is what you make it, and that kind of goes in with the, optimistic, pessimistic kind of thing. So, yeah, I guess I should learn to appreciate the little things more, and it's hard, it's like I see, a beautiful view in nature, and I like it, it's nice. It's not like I don't enjoy it. I like vistas, and I like sunsets and all that kind of thing. But I guess, the other problem with me is that I'm just selfish, I like to say that I care about everyone, and I think I do. I try to be a nice person. I try to, generally I think I'm not an asshole. I go out of my way to, I guess, be nice to people in my everyday life. But at the same time, I am kind of selfish, and maybe I need to learn to be a little bit more giving. Maybe I need to learn to not approach things from such a egocentric standpoint. Maybe I need to learn the joy of giving, I mean, I've done things that, the most I've done in terms of that would be I've done beach cleanups before, and I've done protest marches, and I did do volunteer work once, relatively short period of time. I've actually done some volunteer work, and I've done a bunch of mail-outs in the past when I used to do mail-outs when I was younger. But I don't know. I guess I just feel like a lot of that stuff that you can do that's sort of selfless doesn't really get a lot done. And I guess that's what keeps me from doing it more often than not. And I wish that there was, I felt like there was a real shift happening because of my actions. And again, it can't always be that way. Sometimes you just got to do the little things you can do and hope for the best. So, yeah, I am somewhat selfish. I'm not trying quite hard enough, and that's just how it is. I still think a lot of my complaints are legitimate. I think I am still seeing a lot of what to me are somewhat obvious trends, and I think there is reason to be plenty worried about the future of humanity. But I just wanted to make this video to say I realized that I'm not the high and mighty knower of all the major issues, and that the society has done me wrong, and that's the only reason why I am where I am. Yes, I've made mistakes. Yes, I could have tried harder when I was younger. I just have a hard time with, I guess I have a hard time with authority. I have a hard time doing what I'm supposed to do. I have a hard time following the path that's set for me by people who are more powerful than I am. And, you don't have a lot of choice, and, sometimes you just have to make the best of it. But it's hard for me to suck it up and make the best of it when I feel like the leaders, the emperor has no clothes, basically. That our leaders aren't really qualified to lead. But I see both sides, and I could be trying to do better. I admit it, and I can't say that I will, but we'll see what happens.